We've talked about Grant. How were his terms to end the war when Lee surrendered? Was he nice or was he mean? Nice. He let them keep their what? Weapons, their horses, and gave them food. So Lincoln, his whole thing is to get the Union back together. So does he want rapid readmissions or does he want a long, drawn-out process? Rapid. So he's going to be what? What was the word I said? Lenient. So we talked about his reason why he was going to control it was the presidential pardon. So we had the 10% oath. Sorry. Okay, we had the 10% oath. Why was he doing that? Is that lenient or is that strict? Lenient. Get them back in. Okay, the next thing I had agreed to is the 13th Amendment. Do you think everybody in the South wouldn't agree to that? No. And so that's why we said for the next 100 years, are we going to see slavery again? What's the name of one that we just turned in on our books from our Black Codes? They're going to try to reinvent that. Once they've done this, all new states create governments. There's going to be one specific group hating Lincoln's plan, saying it was too nice. Congress, because now all of a sudden those Southerners are going to come back, but what is going to happen to the amount of seats they're going to take? More or less? More, because what compromise is now no longer a compromise? 3/5, and so African Americans serve as full people because of the 13th Amendment, they're citizens. And so Congress is going to try to introduce the Wade Davis bill that increases the percentage to 50%. Is that harder? Yes. And we're going to see they say that they repudiate debt. We talked about that last time. What does it mean to repudiate debt? Do they assume it or not assume it? Not assume. And they said they wanted this. Lincoln vetoes it. We know what happens to him. He's killed. Who does this bring in to control Reconstruction? Johnson. But on our study guide, we know Johnson is the wrong man at the wrong place at the wrong time. Because Congress is what party? Republican, and he's what? A war Democrat. Congress is from the North, and he is from where? South. He's from Tennessee. His state seceded, but he stayed in the Union. And so Congress, they're going to try to gain control of this. But Johnson's going to be like Lincoln. He's going to be what? Strict or lenient? And he's going to do the same building blocks. 10% oath, 13th Amendment, but he's going to add in something from the Wade Davis bill. The repudiated debt. What does that mean? We pay it or we don't? And he says once they do this, they could all come in. Everybody but Texas does this. And then we see there's going to be some problems. They introduce the black coats. What jobs does that keep African Americans in? Farmers and servants. Can they even rise up in society? No. Can they marry someone of another class? No. Can they go out and freely speak, freely vote? No. So this is slavery just by another name. And then they re-elect ex-Confederate leaders who believe in what? States' rights or union? Okay, do they believe in the 13th Amendment? No, they're the people who are instituting these black codes. And I told you there's this phrase, the South will rise again. Are these people allowing the South to go back to what it was pre-Civil War? And so basically there's no remorse. Congress is going to gain control of Reconstruction by the rationale of the Northwest Ordinance, that these states, when they left, they committed suicide. Now they're reapplying for statehood, and Congress should control it. And we're going to see, y'all have seen on your study guide, eventually Congress is going to try to do what to Johnson? Impeach him. Okay? And that's what we're going to do a reading on today is, was Johnson right? What is going to happen between them? But Congress is going to gain control, and he's warned them about Congress, right? Did he say he was going to be lenient Congress, or were they going to be mean? But they're going to use the same building blocks, but they're just going to add on. So what do you think the first part of the congressional plan is? 10% oath, but not 50. They're going to do 10. What do you think the next thing they're going to add on that we've seen? 13th Amendment, and they're going to add the 14th. And y'all have this on your study guide. It says list the 4 parts of the 14th Amendment. The first part of the 14th Amendment says all African American are conferred civil rights. So what does that mean, civil rights? Are they unequal or equal? Equal. Equal. What do you think that saying that they are equal is trying to combat from these problems? Saying that they're all equal citizens. You cannot take away the vote for them. You cannot prevent them from marrying who they want. You cannot say that there's vagrancy laws against them. You cannot keep them as slaves. What do you think that 14th Amendment is trying to fix from the problems? Remember, they're saying that they're equal. Is it the no remorse, ex-Confederate leaders, or black codes? It's trying to address the black codes. The second thing the 14th Amendment says, if any state denies the vote to African Americans, their representation will be reduced in Congress. So African Americans have the right to what? Vote. And if they don't, what is going to happen to that state's representation in Congress? Wasn't that what the North was worried about? The South was coming back more powerful? And they said, okay, if you don't give them their rights, we're going to take rights away from you. So for the next 100 years, should African Americans have had the right to vote? Yes. Yes. Whose job was it to come in to say, wait, you're taking away their rights. They need to be equal citizens. Congress. For the next 100 years, Congress will not do its job. 3, it disqualified people who were ex-Confederate leaders from ever holding office. So what part of the 14th Amendment does that deal with these problems here? Okay, the last thing, it guaranteed that federal debt would be repudiated by Confederate states. We've seen that before, right? Looking at the 14th Amendment was supposed to create who as equal citizens? African Americans. If they did not, would the South be punished? How? They're lowering their representation. The 14th Amendment is supposed to fix all of these problems, right? Do you think the South's going to like that? No. No. And so what we're going to see, the South will not like this, and they refuse to ratify the 14th Amendment. So do you now understand why the next 100 years, African Americans will be second-class citizens because of this issue? They refuse to ratify it. Eventually it'll be ratified. And we're going to see then radical Republicans gain 2/3 control of Congress. Why is 2/3 really important? It's majority, and what could you do to a presidential stuff? Repeal or veto. So does Johnson have any power now? No. No, because they get 2/3 control. This is why Johnson's going to be impeached. It's going to violate something. Now they have 2/3 control. Do you think the radicals are going to be nicer, or are they going to be meaner? And this is going to lead us to the second reconstructional plan called military reconstruction. Oh, what are we going to send in now? To make sure that what amendments are going to be adhered to? 13th and 14th. So this leads us to military reconstruction. What do you think is not going to be followed, the 13th or the 14th? 14th. And they're not going to let African Americans have the right to what? And this is why in military reconstruction, we see the 10% oath, the 13th, 14th, and now 15th Amendment, which guarantees African Americans the right to what? Vote. Are they being more explicit with the South? Yes. Yes, because did they really hear all of the 14th Amendment? And so now we have military out there. We should see African Americans voting, right? And a lot will. We'll see governors in Louisiana. We'll see city managers in several places. But what this is going to lead to the rise to is another problem. It's called the military districts, yes. It's called the KKK. What's going to happen is we're going to have the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. And what Ku Klux means, it means a recycle, rebirth, trying to go back to. We've always seen the South rise again, right? It tries to come back to. And the Ku Klux Klan, what they're trying to come back to is a social pyramid we've discussed since the beginning of the year. When I went back to colonial America, who do we say was at the top in the Southern society? The planter oligarchy, right? And then we saw our government, right? And then we saw our merchants. Do y'all remember who was the biggest class? The yeoman farmer. What does that mean? They're self-sufficient. They have no what? And then we see landless whites who used to be indentured servants. And who do we see at the bottom? But now, because of the 13th Amendment and 14th Amendment, what distinction is now erased? This whole thing between slaves and landless whites, they're all equal. Do they like that? So who do you think are going to be our most ardent followers of the KKK? Is it going to be the rich, or is it going to be the landless whites? Because now the landless whites are competing with who? For jobs. And so this whole artificial line that used to be there at least gave them a distinction that they were better. But we're going to see our most ardent followers of the KKK is the landless whites, because what do they want to restore? What do they want to go back to? Slavery. And so some new laws are going to come out that are exactly like the black codes, called Jim Crow. I don't know if you've ever heard of Jim Crow. Jim Crow was actually an actor. He was a white man who put on blackface. And he would go and he would do minstrel shows portraying African Americans. And they're going to implement these Jim Crow laws that basically puts African Americans as second-class citizens. It limits their jobs. It limits what they could do. So what is the Jim Crow a violation of if I look at my amendments, 13th, 14th, and 15th? It's a violation of the 14th, so we should have another plan, right? But there's a problem. And it's with this election in 1876. And we're going to have a compromise. Wait, did compromises ever solve the issue? No. Okay, so I want us to focus up here on this wall. Do y'all see that Grant is now a president, right? He sent in troops down here to protect African Americans. He's created the 1876, 1875 Ku Klux Klan Acts to stop the Klan. But there's this election, Hayes. He's a Republican. He's running against a guy named Tilden. Tilden, I always think it has till, so he's from the South. They till the land. Tilden has actually gotten enough votes to win. He's gotten the majority of the votes, but he loses in the Electoral College. He loses in the Electoral College because there's 3 states. These 3 states, Louisiana, Florida, and South Carolina, turn in double votes. One for the Democrats, one for the Republicans. One for the Democrats, one for the Republicans. One for the Democrats, one for the Republicans. Can they have 2 electoral votes? No. And so they decide to sit down a commission. There's going to be a commission of 15 people from the House, the Senate, and the Supreme Court. Is that a good number? Because that means I'm going to have 8, that's an 8 Republicans, and 7 Democrats. Who do you think they're going to decide the election goes to? The Republicans. That's why Hayes is up on that board. Who's going to be upset that they got a majority of the votes? The South, the Democrats, they're going to say they're cheated. And so in this election, what they agreed to is Hayes will win, the Republican, who feels cheated. And they're going to end military reconstruction. They're going to end the military being there. And this is going to lead to a group of people coming up called the Redeemers. Do you think the Redeemers are going to follow the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment? No. And so because we have Hayes as president now, whose rights do we forget in the South for the next 100 years? Who? African Americans. It is because of this election. Look at the backside. Did the South go back to exactly what it was? Yes, because they're not going to be called slaves, but we know they're going to be applied to the Jim Crow laws. So you have this little chart on the back side, and it talks about Reconstruction and how we go back to exactly what we wore before the Civil War. Let me pull it up here. I pulled up the wrong thing. Okay, so y'all have some lines. This is the white oligarchy. That means the top half of that pyramid I drew, right? They come in, and do they want to adhere to the 13th Amendment? They immediately pass the black codes. That leads to a problem. And so Lincoln and Johnson's plans are not working. Congress will come in and implement the 14th Amendment. Do y'all see these X's? This is people who are pro-African Americans, such as scalawags. Y'all had that on your study guide, right? They pack up all their bags, and they stay in the South to support African Americans. And then we get the carpetbaggers. Do they have a bigger bag? Because they're packing it because they're moving from the North to come and help. And all of a sudden, we see that the freedmen are enfranchised. They have the right to what? Vote. But as states start agreeing to this, who do they bring back? What do the little lines represent right here?
The oligarchy.
And what do the oligarchy want to do? Do they want to have full rights and enfranchisement for African Americans? No. And so as we start adding in states, what happens to the freedmen and the scalawags who were protecting the African Americans? It decreases to when we get all the way to the end, Jim Crow, they've implemented a system where we're keeping African Americans back where? On the farm as what? Can we say slaves? No. Servants, sharecroppers, tenant farmers. For the next 100 years, did the South go back to exactly what it was before the Civil War? And it's because of what election that we sell short African Americans on their rights? 77, when he comes into office. So again, doesn't this reflect the South rises again? The South goes back to what it was. Okay. Sorry.